What on earth got you interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
Okay, so what's Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is...
So what's Bitcoin?
Inflation-resistant money.
Bitcoin is the strongest asset the human race has ever invented.
Hello and Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to the Bitcoin Effect. I am Nate Martin, and I am your host. We talk about politics and philosophy and all sorts of different things that Bitcoin has actually had an effect on over the years that it has been in existence. Today happens to be the day after what would be considered Bitcoin Day, when the Genesis block was first mined on January 3rd of 2009. And, you know, the new year has a lot of things that are promising, and I hope that you have some stories about what you want to accomplish as well when we get to that point in time when we just kind of share the microphone and enjoy each other's company. But you know, just to let you know what I want to talk about today. First of all, I want to talk about the Saylor rant. Yeah, I know it happened last Tuesday, but it happened after my show, so I didn't have the opportunity to kind of chime in on what I felt about that. Also, we want to talk about whether or not the whale exchange index being over 90% yesterday is a cause for concern. Ray Dalio said something silly again, and I'll share more of that when we get past the break. And then Nayib Bukele, he's teasing about BTC 2022. He's talking about $100,000 Bitcoin in 2022, and he thinks that the bond issue is going to oversubscribe. We're going to talk about that right after this short break. The conversations in this Twitter space are being recorded for use on various media platforms, and any contributors to the conversation irrevocably consent to the recording and distribution of reproductions of the contributor's voice and performance as part of this program. The Bitcoin Effect is proud to be part of the Bitcoin Spot, the collection of podcasts and forums on Twitter Spaces where you get to participate in the conversation with some of the most knowledgeable names in Bitcoin. Visit thebitcoinspot.net for a glimpse of our lineup. So, real quick, I do want to talk about Saylor's rant from last week, and to be honest, I was more than disappointed. I first of all, the diatribe about digital energy. I went back into my physics course books and Google and just trying to say, can matter be energy? And the answer is no, matter cannot be energy. And so for him to try to extrapolate all of his premise into Bitcoin being digital energy, I just thought it was 20 minutes of my time totally wasted. And then Eric actually brings up something about the blue checks and verification on Twitter. And they said, well, yeah, the verification, the problem with that is that you have to dox yourself, or at least you have to give some personal information or be verified. Can I just ask you a question? And this is rhetorical, or maybe I'm wrong, but if you want to maintain your anonymity, how can you assume that you can ever be verified? I mean, the other person, they want to verify, one, who you are, two, that you have any credibility in the subject that you're talking about. So how is it that you can even have verification with anonymity? It just seems like a total oxymoron to me. And my tenet is this: with credibility comes vulnerability. I go back to Jack Mallers at Bitcoin 2021, and I think to myself, this guy, first of all, we know who he is, and he said the words, "I will die on this hill." Meaning that not only is he going to deal with the ridicule that might come with his holding a strong position, but he basically stated, I will deal with violence should it come to me, but I'm not going to give up on my ideals or what I believe here. And the thing is, we know who Jack Mallers is. And so this verification with anonymity thing, I'm sorry, it sounds like this ethereal good, but it's something that can't happen because it's quite literally a contradiction in itself. The other thing that he talked about was, how do we have, and I need to actually go. He talks about a problem. Saylor talks about a problem, and it's reasonable. And let me play this clip for you so you can kind of understand where he started.
Let's take YouTube. Eric, 4 weeks ago, I was getting 50 Michael Saylor YouTube scam live videos every week. How many do you think I'm getting this week? I got 1,550 of them posted last week.
Now, he brings up an issue that we all deal with, and he started with, email, having to deal with, 15 minutes of having to deal with spam in his email account, or having to, then the 1,550 videos of Michael Saylor, quote, live offering Bitcoin. And yes, it is a problem, and it's a problem of not fiat money. It's a problem of evil people that have no scruples, that have no integrity, that decide that, I can make money by defrauding people out of theirs. So, he brings up the problem, but he tries to come up with a solution. And I want to talk about this because I found it questionable at best. And let me play something for you, first of all, that kind of was a red flag for me. Let me play this.
If we force all of the actors in cyberspace to cloak themselves in energy, then the cost of maliciousness increases by orders and orders of magnitude, and your ability to force civility and safety, it's not a question of does it make it easier. It's a question of can you do it at all or not. And I think that this is a chance for us.
See, I think the question becomes not whether you can do it or not. Whether you can usually comes in the form of government. When you start talking about force and you start talking about behavior, then you start talking about a lack of liberty or a taking away of liberties, which makes me think that ideal is not a bastion of liberty. And that ideal needs to be checked, and it needs to be interviewed, and it needs to be questioned. And I know that Michael Saylor has been the stand-up, put on a pedestal guy because he owns so many Bitcoin, and he's leveraged himself so that he actually, owns over 100 some odd thousand Bitcoin. But it goes back to my topic from last week. What are the ideals of the people that own this much Bitcoin? And is it something that you actually want to follow or agree with as we try to move forward in civilization? In that regard, I would say no, and let me move on.
And I think the great idea here, or the great promise is, we can start it as a virus. We don't have to get all 1,000 platforms to adopt it simultaneously. All we have to do is get anybody to adopt it, even optionally. It doesn't even have to be mandatory. If you said tomorrow people on Twitter can get an orange check if they post 100,000 Satoshis, I would think you would get millions of people that would start to do it voluntarily.
Not me. I'm sorry. But if you want me to put 100,000 Satoshis down and have the current Twitter regulators tell me when I've actually been penalized some of those Satoshis because my behavior or something I said was offensive or something like that, I'm sorry, I'm out. And I can't understand how he would think that millions of people would willingly put up their Satoshis in a custodial place where somebody that we don't know what their moral or civil code is would get to determine whether or not I lose those Satoshis. How he would think that millions of people would actually agree to that. Because if they did, well, then these are the people that are already wearing masks. Okay? I'm sorry. I'll just say that out loud. Okay? There is something wrong with that mindset, thinking that you should just give up and put a deposit down in Satoshis for the right to speak. That does not make any sense to me at all. And finally, one more, and there's a serious contradiction in it, and I'm going to point it out.
So if I create a beautiful Twitter without spam, and I create a YouTube without scammers, and if I create an inbox without spam, and if everything is curated and beautiful and lovely, and you get it for free, and if I create a world where anybody can go online and they can engage and make money.
How? Because if suddenly my advertisements aren't reaching any inboxes, if suddenly my advertising aren't reaching anybody's feeds because for free they can have any spam or any advertisements just excluded from their social media, then how am I supposed to advertise to them? How am I supposed to make money online if there's nobody online that's going to be reached by my advertising? So In that lies a contradiction. I've mentioned a number of different things here, and I want to open it up to you. Log Scale, welcome to the show. You had no idea I was going to go off on like this, did you?
I didn't, but you're not the only one who was disappointed with Saylor's remarks. Was it last week?
It was. I think it was Tuesday night or Monday or Wednesday morning of last week, and I was going, darn, it was after my show because I really wanted to bring this up.
Yeah, there's been speculation that not only were there logical issues with what he said, but that there may be some nefarious aspects to what's motivating him, which fits into some of the research that I've been doing. To me, it's pretty clear that the U.S. government is protecting a path for Bitcoin as a plan B, potentially, but they're also looking to de-anonymize Bitcoin. And some of his remarks could be taken in light of that effort. And he is, connected with MIT. It's his alma mater. MIT is where the Digital Currency Initiative lives, where a lot of the Bitcoin core development is done. And they have made efforts before to try to de-anonymize Bitcoin, known as chain anchor. This gets a little bit deeper into conspiracy theory, but it may be that Michael Saylor is really a front for the U.S. government, and that MicroStrategy's Bitcoin acquisitions are intended to be potential future U.S. Treasury. And if so, he may be working hand in hand with the government and MIT to try to have Bitcoin survive, but in a way that's de-anonymized and co-opted by government. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he was part of that effort. On the flip side, with respect to anonymous and verifiable identities, there actually is such a thing, and I don't really understand it. It's called decentralized identity, or DID, and one of the cypherpunks who visits our space has been working on it. He was working at Microsoft until recently, when he moved over to Square, where he's now working with Jack on this. His Twitter handle is CSU Wildcat, and he's known as Daniel Burr. And there's an article written on Bitcoin Magazine a couple months ago by Level 39, which basically explains how these things work, how you can verify your identity anonymously through cryptography. And I can pull up a link for you. But,
yeah, please do, because
honest,
the whole idea just sounded like a total oxymoron to me. And so if you could get CSU Wildcat, on for next week or something and actually talk about what that actually looks like, boy, I'd love that. I'd love that conversation.
Hey, Log. Can I ask
why
a
don't
quick
we
question?
get him on as a guest? Yeah, go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, I'm just curious because, I've obviously heard you talk about this yesterday, and it intrigues me and, scares me a little bit in one sense. I'm just curious if you've gone kind of the next step, which is to think through some ways that we protect against this kind of thing with regards to Michael Saylor and him being maybe a proxy for the U.S. government, so forth and so on. What should we do as just regular Bitcoiners?
I don't have any specific advice there, other than get your coins off exchanges and be self-sovereign.
Yeah.
That's
Sure.
that's a topic that I would want to bring Shinobi on for, because he's probably the person best known for thinking through different ways that Bitcoin could be co-opted and how to prevent it. So it would be interesting to have him on as a discuss that topic.
I need to apologize because the first person that made a request, and I even forget what his name was, I went to go and add him as a speaker, and I inadvertently, like I said, I apologize. I inadvertently fat fingered and hit remove from space. So if he's down there in the listeners and would like to re-request the opportunity to talk here on stage, then by all means make that request, and I'll try not to hit remove again. I'll try to bring it back up as a speaker. So another one of those occasions where I went, oops, nope, that's not what I meant to do. So for that, I apologize. Going back to the subject at hand, we started talking about Log or Shane, either one of you. And the question becomes, what is the end goal for Michael Saylor as an agent of the U.S. government? Total speculation. I get it. But what would be the end game? What's the goal of actually holding a digital sound money or accumulating that as a government entity?
So just quickly before I answer that question, I went to the TBS bat phone, identified who you removed, unremoved him, and DM'd him to come back. So this goes to the kind of the whole theory about what the U.S. government, the attitude is about Bitcoin, what their plans are for Bitcoin, what they've studied about Bitcoin. And I've been teasing people for many weeks about coming out with a big article on this topic. And I put it on the back burner when I decided to kind of quadruple down on spaces like 6 weeks ago. So, but I am getting it close to completion. The idea is that has been studying Bitcoin the White House, MIT, and Princeton since 2014, and I think they've been taking this pretty seriously and studying it. And by the way, Gensler came to this administration from the MIT Digital Currency Initiative. And so he was hired really for his knowledge about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. So why would the government want to, make plans to potentially embrace Bitcoin? A, they realize they may have no choice. And so if you can't beat them, join them. B, there's a thing known as the Triffin dilemma, which is that when you are the world reserve currency, works out great for you in the early decades and works out badly in the later decades because basically you end up building a lot of debt. Your manufacturing gets offshored. And so the history of world reserve currencies is about once a century, they change from one country to another. It happened like 5 or 6 times in a row. And so the U.S. might be, smart enough to realize that they don't want the dollar to be the world reserve currency anymore, but they don't want it to be China. And so Bitcoin could serve a role as a world reserve asset, which was proposed by Lynn Alden in a long piece a year ago. And we know that the U.S. is working on a digital dollar, a CBDC. I think they believe that their CBDC, their digital dollar, can survive alongside Bitcoin, with Bitcoin being a world reserve asset, basically like a new and better gold, and the dollar, being a currency rather than a world reserve asset as it currently is. I think they think that's possible, and meanwhile, I think they can co-opt Bitcoin and de-anonymize it. And so I think that they are very aware of all of this, and they've been working with experts in top universities, and I think that basically is their thinking, which is good and bad, right? It's got good and bad elements.
Yeah, anytime you start...
I just want to add, if it's okay, Log, one thing to this, which you've probably said before as well, but one of the other reasons that, the United States might be using MicroStrategy / Michael Saylor as a surrogate or a proxy is possibly, if it's actually happening, is because I think the last thing the U.S. would want to do would be to admit that the U.S. dollar is in some form of decline. And if they were, at least the United States, right? If our government was openly accumulating Bitcoin, I think there would be an assumed admission that there's something going on with regards to the strength of the dollar, and that's the last thing they want, right? Given the impact that the U.S. dollar has on the world stage, and I would see that also possibly true for China, although they ban it and all that. There's nothing to say that they're not accumulating as well. Maybe Russia's doing the same thing as well, but I've thought about this months ago. I'm like, some of these nation states might use companies as a proxy for them to accumulate Bitcoin.
I think that is somewhere between possible and likely.
Yeah, consider the
states are beginning to do that.
Exactly. Consider the ramifications, if you will, if we found out as a society.
And if you're El Salvador, you don't care, right? Because you're on the U.S. dollar and arguably want to get away from it, want to be able to be the master of your own, future. And so I think that's also why we're obviously probably going to see, quote unquote, developing countries openly accumulate while the world powers are probably quietly accumulating.
I think that's necessary, because consider the market ramifications if it were found out that the United States or China or a developed country actually was beginning to accumulate Bitcoin. Consider the absolute mass influx of buyers at that point, and also at that point, then you're talking about a mass amount of inflation because suddenly the dollar just doesn't have any value anymore.
Collapse.
Yeah, and in that case, you're talking about a huge if this is the case, and it seems to be a reasonable discussion that countries, specifically the developed ones, are accumulating quietly. They have to, because in talking with Joe Carlasari a couple of weeks ago, the recognition is we want to have a soft whimper grind to a halt. If we suddenly see the dollar and the yen and the euro become valueless, then we're going to see a lot of people suffer to the point where there's going to be the threat of violence only because politicians think that that's going to be the only recourse that they have in order to keep their citizens happy, and by blaming other countries for their downfall.
Totally agree, and think about the fact that, and maybe we're already in a sense saying this, think about the impact to, again, countries that are already in some type of hyperinflation where, people are flocking to the dollar, and even better, flocking to Bitcoin, but those that are still flocking to physical dollars that they can get a hold of, and kind of this little, underground economy working off of that. Imagine even that would probably be impacted, which again will impact even the most affected of us all, if you will, with regards to your purchasing power, that type of thing.
Yeah, the quicker the transition, the more the pain. I think that we all agree on that. Rob, you're on stage. Welcome to the show. Rob, you are still muted. If you have, there you are.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, really interesting idea about Saylor, et cetera. Assuming that the U.S. government is, arrogant.
We should never assume such a thing.
Let's go with that for a second, if we could. Is there a way, and if so, how, that through Saylor or MicroStrategies and or other whales, they can cripple or take down or at least pause Bitcoin over the next, say, decade to a way that makes it at least harmful to us retailers that are just buying some coins?
I sort of talked about this last week as far as who are the whales. how much money do they have? Because they can wield a lot of power even now, even before Bitcoin becomes what we would hope to be $1 million a coin. And it was one of the topics that I wanted to discuss today anyway, which is, the whale exchange index was over 90% yesterday, including 1,335 Bitcoin hitting Coinbase yesterday from an unknown address. So that puts a lot of fear in the marketplace, because generally speaking, when you put Bitcoin onto an exchange, you have the reason being is that you're going to sell it eventually. And so that can squelch the price of Bitcoin, because it puts a heavier supply on exchanges to be bought. Obviously, they don't want to just throw all 1,300 of them on a limit order, because that's going to cause a whole imbalance. But I think that obviously that 1,300 is going to be whittled away, but it's going to keep the price depressed while that supply is still in the background waiting to come on stage.
So yesterday we had a space with TXMC, who's a on-chain analyst for Glassnode, and he said, "Don't pay any attention to that source, and the data is meaningless."
What reason did he give for that?
I don't think he actually gave one, and I'm not sure what it is. But Bitcoin can be moved easily to exchange at any time if somebody really wants to sell. So spoofing is one thing that could be.
Okay.
But I think that I got other concerns about the reliability of the information behind that, and whether that might just be exchange money moving around. I'm not sure, but he said pay no attention.
So, Log, when you say spoofing, do you mean, because this is what I'm thinking, that they do it in a sense as a false flag they have no intent on selling, but hoping people are looking at it and maybe others will try to sell ahead of them, and then they can get more with the price drop? Is that?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. If I had 1,500 Bitcoin, I would do that too all the time. I would just fucking scare the market left and right.
And then buy more.
Why wouldn't you? Yeah,
and then buy more.
Yeah,
exactly.
Every time you want to buy more, you transfer your 1,500 on Coinbase and then put your limits in, and there you go.
So can the U.S. government, aka Saylor, if MicroStrategy sold 100% tomorrow and Saylor came out and said, "My bad, there's a glitch in blockchain," could that cripple it so badly that we wouldn't ever be able to get momentum again? Is that insane?
I think that's a little insane. I think, Rob, that obviously the miners holding and continuing to expend energy to continue to mine Bitcoin. I think that the institutions would see that as a huge opportunity to pick up Bitcoin. I don't see the network of people that see Bitcoin as what it is would just dissipate and make Bitcoin valueless. That's not going to happen. Would it cause a huge dip in the market and for quite a while, perhaps even a year? Sure it would. You bet it would. Hey, look, if we have people dumb enough to move the market or to panic sell or panic buy based on what Elon Musk says about Dogecoin, then yeah, there's going to be people dumb enough to panic buy and panic sell the Bitcoin because of what Michael Saylor says. And I think Saylor has a heck of a lot more pull than what Elon Musk ever did when it comes to Bitcoin.
And the other thing, if I could mention real quick, Nate, I think is true is that, with spaces like this, obviously, hopefully the most devoted, if they have the time to be in these spaces, are learning about these kinds of things. And if any of them actually do happen, then, we've hopefully already been thinking about it and then see it as a buying opportunity. If something, I can't even imagine selling over 100,000 Bitcoin, on anything other than an OTC type situation. But nonetheless, I'm sure it would get out,
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that Saylor has to divulge how many he bought at a specific time. Hey, guess what? We didn't see those on exchanges because those were private deals that he made either with miners or with other whales, and that's not going to move the market. That was a market in and of itself, but the greater market isn't going to move because of that. So, Wicked, What more? I mean, I didn't get welcome to the stage, by the way. You kind of snuck in on me without you actually being introduced. But the major question here was, before we started talking about the speculation that Michael Saylor is a plant of the U.S. government, we talked about his rant from last week and what our thoughts were about that. So, have you anything to add to those opinions?
I actually haven't heard the rants. I heard about them. But I don't really know what he said. Can you fill me in real quick?
Actually, from my perspective, your fortune exceeds my own. Because I was rather disappointed, and hopefully I will be able to post this, and you can hear my rant about his rant. Because when he starts talking about forcing technologies or making people pay for the right to speak, or making it so that it's difficult for small businesses to be able to advertise online when that's where their business is, there were a lot more questions that I was left with than answers or comfort, to be quite honest with you. So, like I said, as far as I'm concerned, you're more fortunate than I am for not having heard them.
Can I comment real quick? I read it briefly, and for me, at first blush, and again, first blush is obviously not always, going to turn out to be the thing, but it sounds to me as like something coming from someone with privilege, right? Someone with tons of resources that has people to help and all the things, right? It doesn't come off to me as someone thinking about an individual business owner or a small company or whatever. So, I mean, from what I can tell, what he was talking about sounds kind of onerous. Sounds like, kind of going backwards, honestly, in many ways. So at first blush, I'm not for any of what he was talking about.
Was he speaking to a specific audience? Like, is there a reason why he was saying those types of things? Could he be Trojan horsing them in any way?
I don't know. It was him and a host, and and I'll just say this out loud because it felt this way. It just felt like he was talking to himself and inviting whoever wanted to listen into his ramblings. And Eric was just sort of the guy kind of kicking the ball so it would continue on if there was a hiccup in Michael's thought process. And it really was. It wasn't an interview so much. It was just kind of Eric agreeing with him and kind of moving him on or trying to collect him back in so that they'd actually talk about economics and Bitcoin after him talking about energy and matter and all of those things. It took 20 minutes for him to actually get to economics and Bitcoin being what he calls digital energy, which I still don't necessarily agree with that nomenclature as far as what Bitcoin is. So like I said, that was a waste of my time, and trying to get any nuggets of value out of what he was talking about was difficult for me. And then when he started talking about forcing technologies and requiring a deposit to speak for some sort of like an orange check mark, so that you actually had credibility because of the money that you deposited. Sorry, not so good. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That point he said multiple times before, and I'm thinking that, again, so I mean, kind of what you were saying before, he's coming from a position of privilege where he has accounts where he is constantly spammed. Like he can't have any DM messaging on any of his social media. he can barely respond to replies. I'm imagining, just because there's millions of bots who are spamming him. So I think he's thinking more in line of require a fraction of a penny deposit or a penny deposit. At least when I've heard him speak previously about that topic.
Yeah, but that goes back to one of my points, though. Wicked is that he was actually suggesting a deposit for people that want their orange check, like 100,000 satoshis, which is subject to penalty if you behave badly. Okay, well, behave badly based on whose standard? That's always the question. Whose moral and civil code are you willing to submit yourself to, especially when it comes to your money? That poses an issue. I got to know what the rules are. And as many times as we've seen Twitter, especially after Jack left, As many times as we've seen them censor or block or suspend accounts for speaking their mind, shoot. And I have lost, had issues. Shoot. It was at this point that my spaces crashed. Coincidence? Let's continue.
Censor or suspend or block accounts, rug pull.
Is that what just happened? Gee, were they trying to tell me something? Were they?
Those might not be the right words to say on here.
Here's the thing, and that's another thing too. How many of us have actually gone on to other social media outlets and went, "Hey, it's time. I'm over here too. So if the big blue bird decides to give me the bird, then I'll be over here." Unfortunately, they don't have social audio like Twitter Spaces does or another competing platform. But I was saying, you know what? If I get kicked out of here, I've been kicked out of better places. I really have. Or I've kicked other people out too. So I totally understand how it works. But the thing is that how badly did I behave? How much was that? Was that 10 or 20,000 Satoshis now that I owe Twitter, or that was taken out of my 100,000 Satoshis? How much did I just lose by behaving badly or speaking against, this particular orange check that has only been, posited by Michael Saylor? Unless it's not, unless it's in the meeting rooms already and I just don't know it.
Yeah, and if those Satoshis go to $1 and more over time, that's no small thing that you had to pay, is it?
And that's the thing. Do I get to appeal? Do I get my Satoshis back? How long is it going to take for me to get those Satoshis back? And if it was $5, is it really worth my actually going after that $5, or do I just let it go? And is that what they're counting on anyway? I'm sorry. That whole idea just smacks bad to me. It's just horrible. So that's my take on that. And like I said, I was guilty of a little bit of hero worship when it came to Michael Saylor because of all of his passion and all of his money going into Bitcoin and all of his interviews and everything. And he's just, pumping up Bitcoin big time as far as the ideals were concerned, not the market. And then I heard that talk last week and I went, this dude's human. And he's trying to talk above his knowledge base, and I was sort of disillusioned with the man, to be quite honest with you. And I guess he's the latest in the list of people that we've sort of been kind of putting too much into. After Elon Musk or name a few other names that have moved the market, even Jack, that have moved the market just by their presence and they're talking about Bitcoin. Well, I think Michael Saylor is the latest example of someone that you need to recognize that he's human too. He puts his pants on left foot first, and then he starts his day just like everybody else. And we need to recognize that he's going to say stupid things just like everybody else. Who was it that said them? Doggone it! I think it was Magoo. And I wish he was here to actually re-say that. If you can find that tweet and post it up there, it was brilliant. It talks about how you can dress your words up fancy and still say something stupid. But I totally blew up what that was supposed to sound like. But that's where we're at. Oh, let's move on. I'm going to go ahead and reset the room so you guys know what you're up against, and then we're going to talk about President Bukele and what his predictions are for 2022.
The conversations in this Twitter space are being recorded for use on various media platforms, and any contributors to the conversation irrevocably consent to the recording and distribution of reproductions of the contributor's voice and performance as part of this program.
How many takes do you think it took me to actually get that right? Because I didn't speed it up. Sorry, I'm just kind of.
You're a professional, so maybe not so many.
Actually, I think it was 3 or 4 when I finally got untongue-tied enough to get that out in a specific period of time, because I was trying to rush through it, because you don't want it to be that long. It's sort of one of those legal, disclaimer type things, which I need to work on a few more of them too. But that's a whole different thing. And Log, you and I still need to talk about getting that or some other things on some other of our shows. But anyway, President Bukele tweeted last week, and there were a couple of things that he said. He was teasing something about Bitcoin 2022. We're going to wax speculative on what that might be. He said that by the end of 2022, Bitcoin will be at 100,000. How many have already swung and missed at that one from last year? And he says that the bond issue is going to be oversubscribed. All that, and then last week, he accepts a gift from the president of a country that's trying to totally eliminate Bitcoin from its own economy. I'm a little confused. Can somebody help me out with that? What are your thoughts on that, and what are your predictions for the coming year as well?
Well, he's still a politician. So again, Michael Saylor's human, Bukele's a politician.
Are you saying then he's less than human? I'm sorry, I'm missing.
I'm saying that if China gives him a gift, he's going to take it because he has to. I mean, what is he going to do? Be like, F you, China? I don't think he can do that.
Well, what's funny though is that my Spanish is really rusty. I mean, I took 1 year back in high school, and that was back in so I don't remember a whole lot of it. But in reading this, I'm seeing what I think is thank you, President, thank you for the stadium, thank you, China, and I'm like, do you even understand? So somebody's got to help me as far as what the El Salvadorian mindset is when it comes to China, the United States. Is there sort of an ideological battle between what China is and what the U.S. is supposed to represent? And how is that being worked out?
I want to make a comment, maybe if I can. I don't necessarily mean this to be wrong, because I don't absolutely know, but I don't necessarily expect El Salvador and the president to have any type of moral compass that we might think of more so from the United States. I agree with Wicked and was going to say what he just said. I think you first have to start out by saying he's a politician, and it's hard to know what they're thinking, and he may be trying to butter up to China because maybe he does want to. He's already thrown his thumb in the face of the United States in some ways, right, with regards to getting Bitcoin anyway, when the IMF is basically saying, hey, you shouldn't do that, all kinds of things. So I'm sure that he's doing some jockeying. He's probably also got, putting out feelers, if you will, just trying to see who would be willing to court him, if you will, as a partner in some way or another, whether that's open or behind the scenes. So it's kind of my thought.
Which only leads me to the conclusion that, yet again, here's another person that's on the list who is human that has utilized Bitcoin to try to get some popularity and some influence, only to disappoint many of those people based on the decisions that he's making. Ken, you are on the stage. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm probably very unqualified to talk about this, but there's a lot of politicians out there, I think, that feel they might be able to gain the upper hand by taking advantage of larger countries' offers, not realizing just how much they're overpowered. And they can often make mistakes stepping into that arena. That's all I've got to say.
No, and I think you make a great point. Unfortunately, many of those countries include many that are in the EU. I think that there's way too much negotiation and accepting of a lot of contracts with other countries that don't necessarily have those nations of the EU's best interest at heart. But you talk about Bukele, he's a young man with not a lot of salt on him, to be honest, politically. And he's put himself in a spot where he's trying to be popular with the people. He's trying to be popular with the Bitcoin community. And he's also now trying to be popular with the East. And he's going to disappoint somebody, and it's going to cause scars somewhere on that body of reputation. I just don't know where that's going to be. So
it'll be whoever's offering him the least amount of resources. So if Bitcoin continues to perform well and he's doing well on Bitcoin, then he'll give the finger to China. If China says, we're going to raise your GDP by 10x, then he'll give the finger to Bitcoin. I mean, just follow the money. That's what it's all about.
But the thing is, following the money is a good line to consider when you would imagine that person doesn't have any other integrity or ideals except for the money. And if that's the case, he's really painting himself in a corner, because if he shows that he just is in it for the money, either for himself or even for his, to try to make his country wealthier in the process, which only gives him more power. If it's totally self-centered, then that's going to be seen not only by his enemies, but also by his allies. And his allies are going to see him as either a product or something that they just don't want to spend money on anymore, which means that there's no loyalty between the two of them anyway, except for the resources and money that is being delivered, obviously, for services. It turns into a quid pro quo, and there's no basis for the relationship other than money, and that's empty, and it's gonna turn on them regardless of who's paying them the most.
The question I would ask, which I think would be helpful, is let's assume for a moment that Bukele had not, gone and done all this with Bitcoin, which again, for the Bitcoin community, probably on the whole is good, but let's assume for a moment that he had not. My question would be, would the focus then be on the thoughts that he's still in many ways a dictator, so forth and so on? So, right, I think, in other words, we all have to try to be holistic and say, it's great that they're doing Bitcoin, and obviously we hope that I do at least, that it actually helps the people. I don't care, a lick about how it helps him as a leader of the country. I would care more about has it really made a difference for the people of El Salvador? But I think that would help people ultimately better assess, kind of, I think, in many ways, what Wicked's saying. I have and it's none of my business in one sense, but I have no trust that he's fully committed to one thing or another other than staying in power, most likely as long as he can.
I was going to ask that question too. So what kind of a politician is he really? I mean, in the United States, we know that politicians have limited influence, or they're supposed to be constitutionally, and that causes there to be what's supposed to be. I'm trying to rethink this now. Less corruption available on a large scale. But you take a look at a Nayib Bukele or any of the, I'll just say it out loud, quasi-dictators that are down in Central and South America. And they have resources available to them that are not of the highest integrity when it comes to elections, or how much strong-arming they can do of their parliaments or congresses, where they have less to worry about when it comes to remaining in power than somebody who is elected every 2, 4, or 6 years.
100% agree, right? He's already, from what I understand, and I don't spend a lot of my days looking at it, but I believe that he rearranged Parliament, right? I think he had some people removed, and he pushed for, I don't know if he had much hesitation from those in doing it, but from what I understand, changed the Constitution so that he could be reelected again. So again, back to and I think you hinted at it without saying it, I think obviously even in Western, quote unquote, Democratic or Republican or Republic type governments, there's still, there's still nefarious things that go on, but it's a little bit harder for them and takes maybe more coordination and more allies. But I think in the case of El Salvador, he probably has some pretty good tools at his disposal to, again, continue to ensure that he stays in power longer versus shorter.
Yeah, and I want to kind of turn it back toward American politics too. There's, and I'm going to kind of change the subject a little bit here. Is when it comes to American politics, I'm from the United States, and so that's what I know. And I believe that the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution are the two in tandem best beginning documents of any nation on the face of the planet. And it really begins with a statement of an ideal, which is, and they state it this way: we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what I want to make sure that we don't do as American Bitcoiners is we don't throw off that ideal, thinking that Bitcoin is somehow going to come up with a better ideal than what was framed by those wise men of 250 years ago. I'm afraid that that's the path that we're kind of headed on, thinking that somehow we are wiser than those men were, without actually thinking in the higher regard the way that they thought and discussed and posited the philosophy and how to deal economically and socially one with another. I don't want to see the United States just implode. I don't want to see the ideal implode, because I think that what most Bitcoiners that I've had conversations with, they believe in the same things that those people believed in. They were more libertarian and almost, it wasn't anarchy, but they believed in small governments by communities within communities. And the only reason for the federal government was to be able to affect treaties internationally. And if we can move back to that ideal, I think that we're going to, and recognize that ideal already exists and we don't need to remake it, I think that we'd all be better off. Now, I know that I have some here that are international that either don't know or have different ideas as far as a national or community ideal, and I get that. But I'd like to hear, some of you talk about whether or not you think that, whether you agree with me or whether you think that there is something better out there and maybe I'm just off my rocker. So I'll open it up. Wicked, you're first on my list. So do you have anything that am I wrong? Tell me where I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. I think you're right. I do think that, those ideals have been lost even within our own country. So I think there's quite a few people who may not abide by those ideals or even think about them very often. They might think that we need a stronger, further reaching government to redistribute wealth and all these other things that we're hearing about. So it's difficult because we're split at home already, regardless of Bitcoin. And the question is, can Bitcoin be used to unite us again, or can it be used to enhance some of these ideals that you're speaking of?
And being split at home itself isn't the problem. Being split at home with the understanding that everybody should do it my way, be it state to state or community to community, that's the problem. It used to be, as I was growing up, and I'm in my mid-50s, as I was growing up, I realized that Nebraska did things different from Michigan, and New York did things different from Oklahoma. And they compared one policy from one state with a policy from another state, and you compared them. And states had the opportunity to either, agree with and adopt or disagree with and reject policies from other states. That's called competition. And it was a heck of a lot easier to move between Oklahoma and Ohio than it is to try to move from the United States to Guatemala. There are different laws in different states for a reason, and state to state should not try to dictate what laws should be, okay? Because the needs of California are different from the needs of Oregon. So if we go back to smaller communities with the federal government overreaching for the common defense, then I think that we'd all be better off. Can we just, like I said, the split is not the bad thing. It's the fact that we all try to strong arm everybody in the country to do it the way that we want it to be done.
So, Nate, can I comment? I agree with you 100%, but maybe what Wicked's trying to say, and I agree, it might take a sound money to get back to that, because one of the biggest problems we have with the federal government is state-controlled money, right? And so many things flow down from that. But I completely 100% agree, that, hey, if it would be nice if people didn't like New York, if they could move to Texas and
like they already have,
not have to, and not well, right. But even that, we still have to worry about federal mandates. Now, if you live in a good jurisdiction, they maybe won't enforce them, but you still got that federal aspect to it. But yeah, I agree. But I think if we could privatize the money, I think it solves some of those problems, not all of them, but remove that control, and all of a sudden a lot of other things are kind of not important anymore because they can't do it. They can't enforce it if they don't control the money.
Yeah, I'm actually looking for something that was posted by Humble Warrior earlier this week, and it was a link to, and I can't remember, if somebody knows what I'm talking about, just kind of pipe in as I'm trying to look for this thing in my messages. It had to do with how the founders actually started this country, and they actually started it with sound money. Okay, I ask this question all the time. I said, what existed first, the dollar or the Constitution? And the answer is the dollar, because the dollar is included as a penalty within the Constitution for specific crimes. Well, if that's the case, but the dollar isn't defined within the Constitution, well, then the dollar must have existed first. Well, what dollar was that? That dollar was actually a measure of weight of the amount of silver in a Spanish dollar. And so sound money was at the beginnings of the founding of the United States as the Constitution was being written. And so I totally agree with you. Bitcoin just becomes a better form of a sound money, that if we get back to that form, then yes, we're all going to be the better off for it. Not only that, but fractional reserve banking was not lawful either. Basically, is the only person that should be lending is someone who has the money to lend. And that's where the creation of money has become so ballooned, is because people are actually able to loan money that don't have the money to loan, which just creates more money, even more money than what's being created through the printing of the Federal Reserve. So I have waxed political a bit too much already, but I wanted to just kind of say these are the ideals that I believe in, and I don't want us to reject them. And obviously, a sound money was actually a part of the ideals when they were initiated. And I just want to caution us to not. I don't want us to reject the ideals because of the incompetency of the people that are supposed to be protecting them. That's my rant, and I'll actually end this. I'll end this episode with one story. And something that somebody said that, and I hope it rings true. But the story is this: there was a shoe salesman, and he was being sent to an African nation to set up shop, and he was excited to go and move into a new market. But as soon as he got off the plane, he met a welcome by the residents of that nation, and immediately his heart sank. His heart sank because as he looked at the ground, he realized that there was nobody there that wore shoes. So he immediately went to the nearest payphone. Yes, this is that old of a story. And he said to his manager, "You might as well just get me a ticket back here because nobody wears shoes." Well, a couple months later, the same company sent a new salesman to the same place. And the salesman, when the door opened on the plane and he was walking down the stairs and he saw the same thing that the other salesman saw, and he ran straight to the phone and he told his manager, you need to send me a heck of a lot more inventory because nobody around here wears shoes. And the reason I tell that story is because Ray Dalio said something that actually reminded me of the story. And he said this, and I'm going to quote it. Furthermore, gold is a universally recognized store of value, while only a small percentage of the world is estimated to use Bitcoin as an investment and a store of value. I would say this, that's bullish. That's telling me, call the manager, tell him to send me more inventory because nobody around here wears shoes. I hope that you recognize that there's a lot of people that are making statements that are totally contradictory to the point that they're trying to make. And Ray Dalio said one right there, because if you recognize that we're early and that Bitcoin is what it is, and it is the best version of money that we have ever created, then we can move as a society forward with better property rights and a better society. So I will open it up to anybody else here who's on the stage that wants to put in their 2 sats worth, and then we're going to go ahead and end this episode of the Bitcoin Effect. Wicked, you got anything to add?
Nothing to add. I do like that story. But yeah, nothing to add. Thanks for having me up here.
You bet. Shane, anything to finish off with?
Just thanks for letting me be able to be a part of the conversation. This is a great spaces today, and yeah, just thanks for all your contribution, and log you as well. So yeah, thanks again.
And finally, Ken, you're still on the stage. Anything to add to finish off the episode?
No, I'm so new. I've just come to the spaces to learn. And since I just started investing in Bitcoin earlier this year, I have to admit one thing. I was orange pilled by Michael Saylor. Listening to his videos is what gave me an understanding. I've been a welder for most of my life, and his engineering metaphors with regard to Bitcoin convinced me of exactly what it is and where it's going. So I would like to say on one point that I agree with you 100% as far as the principles that we here in the United States abide by as far as the Constitution goes. And I hope we do not continue to separate ourselves from those. Thank you for allowing me on this space and to have word. And I've enjoyed listening to everybody here. Thank you for that chance.
Ken, you represent the audience that we're actually trying to reach, because the more people that want to learn more about Bitcoin, that's why we're here. And there are plenty of places that have plenty of drama, and that is a show that I don't want to have. I want to be about information. I want to be about having discussion. I want to be about speculating, and I want to be about polishing ideas. And so for you to be able to come here and share and listen and to be part of the program is exactly the goals that we have for this show. Everybody that's been on the stage today and everybody listening, I know that I've noticed a lot of people down here that with whom I am familiar and had conversations with. Thanks for joining us here on the Bitcoin Effect. Hey, if you're listening to a replay of this program, either on YouTube or on Spotify or another podcast server, hey, thanks for joining us. And if you take the opportunity to leave us a review or a comment, that really helps us out a lot. And it also helps those who don't know a lot about Bitcoin to discover these programs. So make sure that you join me if you want to join in on the conversation every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, so that you can join us here on the Bitcoin Effect. I'm Nate Martin. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next week.